Hello and welcome back. By now we have talked about the importance of following a SQL style guide, which includes clear communication, collaboration, and maintainability. As I promised in the last video, today I will share some practical tips and examples that you can start applying right away to level up your SQL skills. If you don't know me, I am Ruslan Brilenkov, a senior data scientist working here in Canada. On my channel, I talk about data science, technology, artificial intelligence, as well as my experience with immigration and life in Canada. And without further ado, let's jump right into the practical SQL style guide. When we write SQL query, the very first statement is select statement. And it may sound obvious, but it is really important to never write select star or select all in production codes. Always opt for explicit column names. Yes, it may take longer to write query. Yes, and it can be frustrating to keep track of all of the column names of each table you join. But there are several good reasons for doing so, and it can potentially save you a lot of headache and even money down the road. Reason 1. When the underlying table structure changes, the select star statement can lead to unexpected results, such as producing different results without you knowing, not throwing error when it should, and pulling much more data than necessary. Reason 2. The obstacle for your teammates. Select star makes query much harder to read for people who did not write it. Imagine that you have a lot of CTEs and complex structure and your query spans hundreds or even thousands lines, and someone wants to check your query where you used select star in the very beginning. Reader will have to go to the location of the table, check all of the column names to see what you're actually pulling. It's a lot of extra unnecessary work. From the privacy and security standpoint, what if someone made a mistake and added a column that should not be visible to others outside of those with access? And if you use select all and share the result in company-wide report, for example, you would be inadvertently exposing that sensitive information. The reason 4. Potentially saving some money down the road. This is particularly relevant in case of Google Cloud's BigQuery that uses columnar structure format for storing the table data. So it encodes every column name you are using, and using select all statement can lead to excess compute utilization. So basically, the more column you let BigQuery read, the more compute utilization you use, the higher the price. So why paying BigQuery more money than necessary, right? You are welcome. And note that using these statements like limit, where, and order by do not change or minimize how many columns will be scanned by BigQuery. They only limit output it provides. Let's move on to the next guideline, which is naming conventions. And I want to tell about best practices of naming the table columns versus the user-defined functions or stored procedures. If you don't know what is the stored procedures in SQL, I explained them in one of my previous videos, which I will link somewhere here. The best practice for naming the table columns is something which is called the snake case, where each unique element, like a word, is separated by the underscore. As an example, instead of naming a column in one go customer order date, it should be customer underscore order underscore date. And avoid using spaces and abbreviations, so your queries and table structures will be understandable by all audiences, such as instead of cus underscore ord underscore dt, opt for something more descriptive like customer order date. Believe me, when working with different teams, I'm speaking here from the experience that it's better to avoid abbreviations if possible. As for the stored procedures or user-defined functions, the best practice is to use something which is called camel case. Like camel is a horse with humps. Instead of using underscores, you combine words one after another, again without spaces, and where each new word capitalized. But specifically for the procedures or functions, you also place a small f and underscore in front. For example, procedure to normalize text can be called something like f underscore normalize text. For naming table columns, we use snake case, and for store procedures and user-defined functions, we use camel case. Next guideline is to use SQL commas like a pro. When learning SQL, many find it intuitive to use trailing commas, but using leading commas can significantly improve your SQL coding efficiency. Let me explain how it works. For this, I will jump right into the PG admin 4. We have the table called invoices, and I want to select the invoice ID, customer name, total amount of the invoice, the date, and whether it was paid or not, because you can see I'm selecting the where closed is paid is equal true. So I want to test it out. Let's run this query here, execute script, and we see that we got two data entities with the is paid invoice true. And after I did this testing, for example, I don't want to show this column anymore is paid. I know that this code works. In this case, it's very simple 10-line code, but if it is again hundreds, thousands line queries, you want to test each specific element separately and then see if it works. Then you don't need normally to print out all of the columns, right? So in this example, what if I want to comment out this column? I can use double dash, or in short, if it is Mac, it's command plus slash. It can easily comment out the whole string, or if it is Linux or Windows, probably it's control slash. Why I'm showing this? Because it's really efficient to comment out the whole blocks of code like this. So if I want to comment out this column is paid, but I forgot to remove this or comment out the comma on the previous line, you will see that we will get error that there is a comma, syntax error, at or near from. So if I remove a comma, you will see that we get the output without this is paid column. So if I want to remove next invoice date, I will need to do two actions, right? Comment out the column and, for example, comment out the comma. So again, if I work with hundreds of columns, it's not really efficient to do these two actions. So I want to show you how we can improve this by simply placing the trailing commas in the end of each column name in front of the next line, like this. I did not change anything here in this query except for placing the commas like this. Now, if, for example, I will run it to show that it will give the same output, but now if I don't want this column is paid, then simply comment it out. If I don't want this or that, I can comment out any number of columns and then I don't get any errors. So it really creates a lot of efficiency, and who has now hours to spare to just tinker around with all this syntaxes? Just make your life easier in the long run to just move the trailing comma to make it a leading comma. Next guideline is called river alignment. This is one of the most effective practices when writing your SQL query. You write it in a way that each new SQL statement written on a new line, and each new SQL statement is right aligned compared to the previous statement. Think about the analogy of a river. You have a river and two shores. So on the one shore you have previous SQL statements, on the next one you have other new SQL statements as well as all of the column names and variables. To show you what I mean, let's jump back into the pgadmin 4 and comment out this previous example of improved commas. For the sake of this example, so let's add one layer of complexity and join our previous invoice tables with hypothetical table called bill details. And it will have some kind of bill type, for example, heating, water, gas, and so on, as well as some bill details. So as you can see, if I comment out these 4 lines, essentially it will be our previous case. You can even run it to show that it will run. You can even remove the space, and then we will left join our bill details with the invoices, and on invoice ID, which is hypothetical example, it is primary foreign key pair. It's okay query, but it's not easy to read if you have many more joins, like inner join and right join or whatever you want. If your query becomes really big and it spans hundreds and thousands lines, then it is kind of hard to identify visually the chunks of query code. So I want to show you how it would look like if we follow this river alignment. You can see we aligned previous statements after select and created a gap here, so it's easier to catch that like this whole block is for select statement, next from, and then join, and then like where, order by, and so on. So this river that aligns, so it will be easier to see logical chunks: select, from, like joins, maybe order by, group by, where, etc. So it makes query easier to read and scan through. So your teammates and collaborators will thank you for this. So we talked about the best practices to make your coding more effective and help with collaboration with your teammates. And I want to touch on one really bad practice. If you can, try to avoid it, okay? Is writing SQL statement all in one line. Practically unreadable. Even if you put every SQL statement on a new line, like select, from, left join, where, order by, still you have, for example, column names all in one go. It is practically unreadable, and it's really hard to read when everything is jumbled in one way like that. And moreover, coming back to Google Cloud BigQuery, it has the line limit of 120 symbols. Like here, it will be symbol 107 or like 106. Anything above that will move to the next line, and it can be moved really in weird and unexpected ways that is even harder to read. So I would try to even avoid or minimize the places that are longer than even 100 symbols in one line, because it's really hard to read, and even if you yourself come back after a long time to your query, you will find it difficult to see what is going on there. As for the guideline 5 and 6, try to keep your line length less than 100-120 symbols if you can. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier about the naming conventions, there is one that is used to separate the SQL statements from the actual names of columns, stored procedures, etc. And there are 2 ways of naming statements, like select, from, where, etc. It can be either uppercase or lowercase, but do not mix both of them, where, for example, you have select ID from table invoices, where select is all caps and from is lowercase. Again, you want to make sure that even if your query for a week or a month, you will come back and then you can clearly see and separate those chunks of query into logical blocks that are easily identifiable. I prefer using all caps, but that's really personal preference. You can use lowercase as well, but just don't mix them up, okay? If you are still here, thank you for watching until the end. I know that it's a lot of information, and please don't feel overwhelmed or stressed out. Pick one or two guidelines, start implementing it. When it becomes your second nature and habit, then pick the next one and so on. You know, from my personal experience, I can really tell you that over time your brain will start thanking you for following these guidelines, because it really makes your SQL more efficient, and you would spend less time on figuring out the intricacies of how the code is written and its syntax, and you could spend the time for thinking about improving its logic or thinking about your applications. At the end of the day, data science is not about just writing SQL statements, right? It's about answering questions. So the less time you can spend in all these routine works and more refining your queries, algorithms, and how you can answer questions, the better. I would like to hear from you and know what you're thinking about this tutorial. If you have any suggestions or recommendations or you want to learn something specifically, just leave me a comment, let me know. Let it be a two-way conversation rather than only a monologue from my side. Last but not least, if you're interested in more SQL examples and tips and tricks, check out the SQL playlist on my channel. Thank you for watching and see you next time.